Maya Collins, at 14, was far from ordinary. While most kids her age were glued to phones, video games, or social media, Maya spent hours in a flight simulator in her bedroom, memorizing cockpit layouts, engine procedures, and emergency checklists. Her father had been a retired Air Force pilot who had died 2 years ago, leaving behind a legacy of stories, manuals, and a single, unwavering belief in Maya's abilities. Today, she was about to board Flight 482, a commercial jet from Denver to Washington, D.C., alone for the first time. Everyone around her assumed she was just another nervous teenager traveling solo. The boarding gate was buzzing with activity. Families hugged, travelers wheeled their luggage, and flight attendants scurried back and forth with clipped efficiency. Maya carried only a small backpack, tightly packed with her essentials, a notebook filled with diagrams and notes, a small tablet loaded with flight apps, and a water bottle. To the other passengers, she looked fragile, almost invisible in the crowd. But her eyes, bright and alert, missed nothing. Every announcement, every click of a trolley, every hum of a moving luggage cart registered in her mind. As she passed through the security check, a man chuckled when he noticed her boarding pass. "Traveling alone?" he asked, eyebrows raised. Maya nodded politely. "Yes, sir, I'm fine," he smiled, assuming she was simply confident for her age, and let her pass without a second thought. To him, she was nothing more than a precocious child. But Maya had been preparing for this moment for years. Today wasn't just a flight, it was a test of everything her father had taught her. She reached the gate and waited as passengers boarded in groups, each absorbed in their own world. Some parents squinted, wondering if their kids could handle such a flight alone, and some business people glanced at Maya dismissively. She noticed the looks, those curious, patronizing glances, but didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that perception didn't matter, preparation did. When the flight attendants announced that boarding was complete, Maya walked calmly down the jet bridge, her backpack snug on her shoulders. Every step was measured, confident, betraying none of the excitement racing through her veins. Stepping into the aircraft, she felt a familiar thrill. The cabin smelled of recycled air and faint coffee from the galley. Rows of seats stretched in neat alignment, and overhead compartments clicked shut as passengers stowed their bags. Maya's eyes were drawn to the cockpit door at the front. She had never been inside a commercial cockpit during a live flight, but the instruments and controls felt like home to her, at least in her mind. As she walked to her assigned seat, she noted the positions of the flight attendants, the captain's nod of acknowledgement, and the slight tension in the air as passengers settled in. Her seat was near the window, just behind the wing. From here, she could see the pilots through the small cockpit window, a fleeting glimpse of the controls she had only seen in simulations. She watched them run through their pre-flight checks with quiet fascination, noting the meticulous movements, the way they scanned gauges, and the small communications they exchanged. While others chatted, scrolled through phones, or napped, Maya's mind raced through emergency protocols, instrument readings, and engine behaviors. She whispered the checklist steps under her breath, as if reinforcing them for some future unknown. The flight attendants began their safety demonstrations. Passengers stretched, fidgeted, and sighed as they listened to instructions about seat belts, oxygen masks, and emergency exits. Maya, however, absorbed every word. Her eyes followed the path of the seatbelt demonstration, memorizing how the latch worked, how the oxygen masks would deploy, and the location of emergency exits relative to her seat. She noticed tiny details, the weight of the life vest, the sound of the overhead compartments closing, the subtle vibrations through the cabin floor. While others dismissed it as routine, for Maya it was crucial knowledge. The plane's engines hummed to life, a low, steady rumble that resonated through the floor. Passengers felt the vibrations and clutched their armrests, some excited, others nervous. Maya smiled slightly. She had felt this same vibration countless times in her simulator, imagining the subtle shifts in thrust, the importance of flaps, and the delicate balance needed to maintain smooth liftoff. As the plane taxied to the runway, She scanned the cockpit instruments she could see, noting how the pilots monitored the throttle, navigation systems, and fuel gauges. She recognized the subtle interplay between manual controls and autopilot, a lesson her father had drilled into her endlessly. Finally, the plane reached the runway. Engines roared louder and the entire cabin seemed to lurch forward slightly. Passengers gripped their seats as the jet accelerated, wings trembling against the air. Maya felt that familiar thrill, the anticipation, the raw power, and the delicate mechanics that kept hundreds of lives suspended miles above the ground. She leaned slightly forward in her seat, eyes focused, ready for every movement, every sound. The plane lifted off with a smooth tug, ascending gracefully into the sky. Around her, people murmured in awe and fear, but Maya's mind was calm, analyzing the ascent as she had countless times before. The first hour passed uneventfully. Passengers relaxed, reading books, chatting softly, or dozing. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles, offering drinks and snacks. Maya, however, stayed alert. She observed engine gauges, the slight pitch of the wings, and the subtle vibrations from the fuselage. Her notebook lay open on her lap, filled with diagrams of wing aerodynamics, instrument panels, and engine schematics. She scribbled minor notes, comparing them to what she observed in real life. To her, this flight was both ordinary and extraordinary, a real-world simulation she could finally experience firsthand. Despite the calm, a small knot of unease lingered in Maya's stomach. She couldn't explain it. There was no warning, no sign, but something about the flight felt slightly off. Perhaps it was the faint irregularity in the engine's hum, or maybe it was the subtle sway of the plane through a patch of high-altitude turbulence. Her instincts, honed over years of simulated emergencies, told her to remain vigilant. She adjusted her seat, leaning closer to the cockpit window, studying the pilot's movements and the instrument panel's tiny, blinking lights. Everyone else dismissed these details, but Maya noted each one carefully. Passengers around her remained oblivious, some dozing, some reading, some scrolling through their devices. They saw a quiet girl absorbed in her notebook and assumed she was harmless, perhaps a prodigy of sorts, but not capable of much beyond academics. What they didn't know was that this quiet girl had memorized the entire emergency procedure manual for the type of aircraft she was flying in. She had spent weekends on flight simulators, perfecting landings, engine failures, and autopilot overrides. In her mind, she was prepared for anything, but even she didn't yet know just how much that preparation would soon be tested. Maya took a deep breath and closed her notebook for a moment, gazing out at the clouds rushing past. She imagined herself in the cockpit, hands steady on the controls, eyes scanning the horizon and ears tuned to every subtle sound of the aircraft. She smiled faintly. To the world, she was just a kid. But inside, Maya knew that she had the skills, the knowledge, and the determination to rise above any challenge, even one that no adult could foresee. Little did anyone on Flight 482 know, the journey they had embarked on was about to take a turn none of them would ever forget. Maya Collins, the quiet girl with a passion for flight, was about to become far more than just a passenger. She was about to face a test that would demand everything she had ever learned, and prove to the world that sometimes the smallest, youngest person in the room can hold the greatest power. The first hour of Flight 482 had passed without incident. Passengers had settled into a rhythm of quiet conversation, reading, or dozing lightly against the hum of the engines. Maya Collins, however, remained vigilant. She sat near the wing, notebook open but untouched, eyes scanning the subtle vibrations beneath her seat. Something felt off. She couldn't explain it, not fully, but the low, almost imperceptible vibration in the right engine made her stomach tighten. She leaned forward, adjusting her seat, and focused on the sound, matching it with the data she had memorized in countless simulator hours. The plane had just crossed the state line when turbulence began. At first, it was minor, a slight shaking that passengers dismissed as normal air currents. Drinks sloshed in cups, and a few passengers muttered complaints under their breath. But then the plane shuddered more violently, rolling slightly from side to side. A woman in the aisle seat gasped, gripping the armrests, while her child clung to her tightly. Maya noticed the vibration intensify, a metallic grind in the engine she had studied carefully. She had felt this exact sensation before in simulations. A mechanical warning sign, subtle but urgent. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but tinged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some turbulence. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin." Passengers relaxed slightly, trusting the voice of authority. Maya, however, remained alert. She watched the flight attendants move briskly, securing carts and checking passengers' belts. Their faces, usually calm and professional, were tight with unease. The plane rattled again, harder this time, and the engines let out a low, uneven hum. Maya's heart began to race, not from fear but from recognition. The vibration, the pitch, the timing, something was wrong with the right engine. A flight attendant passed her, offering a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, sweetie," she said, patting Maya on the shoulder. Maya nodded politely but did not return the smile. She didn't need reassurance. Her mind raced through potential scenarios: engine failure, autopilot disengagement, sudden decompression. She ran through emergency checklists in her head, each step precise and methodical. In her simulations, she had prepared for these exact situations. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently, throwing a few passengers against their seatbelts. A man spilled his coffee, muttering curses, while another passenger let out a startled cry. The captain's voice cut through the commotion, sharper this time. "Flight attendants, secure yourselves immediately. All passengers, remain calm and in your seats." Maya's pulse quickened. She watched the cockpit window intently. The captain and first officer were moving rapidly, their hands flying across the controls. From her seat she could only catch glimpses, but every movement made sense to her trained eyes. She could see the flicker of warning lights, the subtle adjustments of throttle, and the careful monitoring of the instruments. This was no ordinary turbulence. This was a mechanical issue, and she knew it. The plane rolled slightly to the right. A soft alarm sounded in the cabin. Maya's stomach dropped. That alarm indicated abnormal engine behavior, something she had memorized but never hoped to experience in real life. She gripped the edge of her seat, her mind racing. Her father's voice echoed in her memory: "Always observe first. React second. Panic is never an option." Passengers around her were starting to panic. A woman clutched her child tightly, whispering prayers. A man tried to reassure his companion, but his voice trembled. The flight attendants worked frantically, offering water, trying to calm nervous passengers. Maya noticed one of them glance at her and shake her head slightly, dismissing her as just a kid. Little did they know, Maya was already mentally calculating steps to stabilize the plane if necessary. Then it happened. The first officer suddenly slumped forward in his seat. A soft thud echoed as he hit the console, groaning faintly. The captain immediately reached over, attempting to stabilize him. A hush fell over the cockpit, visible even to passengers who could only see through the small window. The captain's face paled, and he stumbled slightly, gripping the controls with one hand while trying to help his colleague with the other. Maya's heart pounded. She realized instantly, if both pilots were incapacitated, the plane would drift uncontrollably. Hundreds of lives were at stake. Flight attendants ran down the aisle, panicking, shouting for anyone with flight experience. A middle-aged man attempted to volunteer, claiming he had flown small private planes. Maya knew he would not be sufficient. The difference between a private plane and a commercial jet was vast, and time was running out. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I can help." Her voice was quiet but firm. The flight attendant paused mid-step. "Excuse me," she asked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Maya repeated herself. "I can help, I know what to do." The woman hesitated, scanning her young face, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Maya's eyes were serious. No fear, no hesitation, only focus. The turbulence worsened. The plane tilted sharply, sending drinks flying and passengers gasping. The flight attendant looked at her in disbelief but finally nodded, realizing that no one else had the skills. "The cockpit," she said, her voice trembling. Go help them." She guided Maya quickly through the narrow aisle, dodging panicked passengers and spilled drinks. Every step Maya took felt heavy with responsibility, yet her training kept her calm. Inside the cockpit, the situation was worse than she imagined. The first officer lay unconscious, and the captain struggled to maintain control, sweat dripping from his brow. Instruments blinked erratically, and the engine hum grew more irregular. I think I can," Maya began, her hands hovering over the controls. The captain looked at her, wide-eyed, unsure whether this was a joke or if she truly knew what she was doing. "Do you understand these controls?" he asked, voice strained. "Yes," Maya replied, her voice was steady. "I've studied them for years. Please let me help." The captain hesitated for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Turbulence rocked the plane, alarms blared, and passengers' cries echoed faintly through the cockpit door. Then, with a reluctant nod, he stepped aside. Maya slid into the co-pilot seat, fingers brushing over the cold, complex array of instruments. Her mind raced, recalling every simulator lesson, every emergency procedure, every adjustment her father had drilled into her memory. The plane shuddered again, violently this time. Maya's heart pounded, but her mind was clear. She focused, scanning each gauge, each indicator, matching what she saw with what she had memorized. One wrong move could endanger everyone on board, yet she moved with deliberate precision, adjusting controls, monitoring engines, and stabilizing the plane as best she could. Passengers continued to panic, unaware that a 14-year-old girl was now guiding the fate of their lives. Flight attendants whispered in shock, She's actually doing it." Outside the cockpit, the sky stretched endlessly, clouds rushing past, oblivious to the tiny hero at the controls. Maya took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. The turbulence, the alarms, the chaos, all of it mattered, but she would not let it overwhelm her. The plane's hum stabilized slightly under her touch, a small victory in the face of impending danger. Maya Collins, the kid everyone had dismissed, had already begun turning what seemed like a nightmare into a fight for survival. She was no longer a passenger. She was the last line of defense. The cockpit was a small, tense space, vibrating with urgency. Maya Collins, barely 14, sat in the co-pilot seat, eyes fixed on the panel of blinking lights and dials. Her fingers hovered over the controls, instinctively adjusting and monitoring instruments, matching her observations with the countless simulations she had endured in her father's old flight simulator. Every training exercise, every checklist she had memorized suddenly became critical knowledge. The first officer remained unconscious, slumped forward against the console. His breathing was shallow, and sweat clung to his pale face. The captain, gripping the yoke with one hand, struggled to maintain a steady course with the other. His eyes darted frantically between gauges, then to Maya as if searching for some miraculous solution. "Can you help me stabilize the plane?" he asked, voice hoarse, the strain evident in every word. Maya nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I think so, sir. I've trained for situations like this." Her words were calm, precise, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through her veins. The captain hesitated, incredulous. This was a child, barely a teenager, yet here she was, offering guidance with the confidence of a trained pilot. Outside, passengers clutched their seats, unaware of just how dire the situation had become. A mother held her child tightly, whispering comforting words through trembling lips. A businessman muttered prayers under his breath. The turbulence continued to buffet the plane, sending waves of panic through the cabin. Flight attendants struggled to maintain order, their calm facades cracking under the weight of fear. Back in the cockpit, alarms blared. Maya's heart raced, but her hands moved methodically. She adjusted the throttle slightly, monitoring the engine's temperature gauges, then nudged the plane's pitch to stabilize altitude. The metallic vibration she had noticed earlier had intensified, signaling a potential engine failure. She recalled her father's instructions. Always maintain control first. Systems can fail, but if you hold the aircraft steady, You have a chance." The captain tried to speak to air traffic control but struggled to reach the radio. Maya leaned over, quickly taking the microphone. Her voice, though young, was clear and confident. "This is Flight 482. We have a situation. Co-pilot incapacitated. Captain struggling. Request immediate guidance for emergency procedures." The controller's response was hesitant. "Flight 482, repeat your status. Are you saying the captain is incapacitated?" "Yes, please advise. We need guidance now," Maya replied, her tone steady despite the chaos. The controller paused, then gave a series of instructions. Maya followed them flawlessly, adjusting flaps, monitoring engine RPM, and calculating descent trajectory. Each decision had to be precise. One mistake could spell disaster. Her hands moved instinctively, every movement a combination of training, memory, and raw intuition. Suddenly, a loud bang reverberated through the fuselage. Maya's stomach dropped. The right engine had partially failed. Smoke trailed from its exhaust and the vibration grew stronger. The plane tilted dangerously to the right, sending a few unsecured items sliding across the cockpit. The captain gritted his teeth, gripping the controls with renewed effort, but his strength was fading. Maya assessed the situation in seconds. "We need to adjust the left engine's thrust to compensate. Hold the yoke steady," she instructed, keeping her voice calm. She could see the panic beginning to creep into the captain's eyes, but her confidence never wavered. "Trust me, sir. I can stabilize this." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Outside, the clouds whipped past, a storm of wind and rain battering the fuselage. Maya's mind ran through every possible scenario: engine failure, hydraulic loss, emergency landing. She ran mental checklists rapidly, recalling her father's voice guiding her through simulations. Every control input was deliberate. Every adjustment mattered. Back in the cabin, passengers began to murmur in fear. Drinks spilled, phones rattled, and whispers of panic spread like wildfire. Flight attendants tried to calm people, but the tension was palpable. Maya's quiet confidence, however, radiated through the cockpit. Though invisible to the passengers, her presence was the thin line between chaos and control. The captain leaned back slightly, exhaustion evident on his face. I don't know if I can," he murmured, voice breaking. Maya didn't flinch. She placed a reassuring hand on the yoke. "Sir, I've got this. Focus on your breathing. Let me guide the plane." The words, simple yet firm, seemed to anchor him. Slowly, he nodded, stepping back slightly while still supporting minor controls. The first officer remained unconscious, completely dependent on Maya's growing expertise. Then a new alarm sounded, one Maya had feared but had trained for extensively: hydraulic pressure dropping. This meant limited control over flaps and landing gear. She quickly assessed options, calculating descent trajectory and alternative emergency procedures. Her fingers flew over the switches, engaging backup systems, stabilizing the plane's pitch and yaw. Every movement was precise, every decision crucial. She could feel the weight of every life aboard pressing down on her shoulders, yet she refused to panic. Outside, the weather worsened. Thunder rolled across the sky and lightning illuminated the clouds in jagged streaks. Turbulence intensified and the plane rocked violently, throwing unsecured objects across the cabin. Maya's voice rang out through the intercom, calm and authoritative. "Everyone, remain seated. Fasten your seat belts. We are stabilizing the aircraft." Passengers exchanged confused glances. The voice was young, too young for such authority, but the calmness carried an almost magnetic reassurance. Some began to follow her instructions without fully understanding why. Even flight attendants paused, realizing this girl might be the only hope for everyone on board. Maya took a deep breath. She adjusted the left engine's thrust again, carefully balancing the failing right engine. The plane responded, stabilizing slightly. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her hands remained steady. She spoke softly to herself, reciting emergency checklists, verifying each step. Her mind was a perfect combination of instinct and learned procedure. The captain, now recovering slightly, looked at her in awe. How did you?" he began, unable to find words. Maya smiled faintly, focused on the controls. "Years of practice, sir. I've trained for situations like this." A tense silence followed, broken only by the hum of engines and the occasional alarm. Maya's presence had transformed the cockpit. She was no longer just a kid. She was the pilot, the stabilizing force, the unseen hero managing a crisis that would have overwhelmed most adults. Minutes passed. The immediate turbulence lessened slightly, but the danger was far from over. The plane was still off course, engines unstable, and the crew incapacitated. Maya's eyes scanned instruments, maps, and dials, calculating every possibility for descent and emergency landing. She knew she had to act quickly, decisively, and without error. And in that moment, surrounded by blinking lights, alarms, and the storm raging outside, Maya Collins became more than a child passenger. She became the only person capable of guiding Flight 482 safely through the chaos. The stakes had never been higher, and yet, for the first time, she felt ready. The cockpit was a tight, tense space, filled with the low hum of the aircraft and the occasional blaring alarm. Maya Collins slid into the co-pilot seat, her hands hovering over the controls. Her heart raced, but her mind was laser-focused. She could see the panic etched into the captain's face. The first officer remained unconscious, slumped against the console. Every passenger aboard Flight 482 depended on the choices she was about to make, though they had no idea a 14-year-old girl had now assumed command. "Can you do this?" the captain asked, voice strained, eyes wide. "Yes, sir," Maya replied, steady and calm. "I can help stabilize the plane." The captain's brows knitted together in disbelief. He had seen many emergencies, trained for countless scenarios, but he had never encountered a child in the cockpit taking control. His hands shook slightly as he guided Maya through some immediate readings. "The right engine is failing. We may lose hydraulics. I can barely maintain altitude." Maya took a deep breath, her mind scanning every piece of information displayed on the instrument panel. The warnings, the pitch, the yaw, the fluctuating RPMs, they all told a story she understood deeply. She adjusted the left engine slightly, countering the failing right engine's irregular thrust. The plane rocked, and the metallic grind she had noticed earlier became more pronounced, yet her hands moved with the precision of someone who had spent thousands of hours in a simulator. She activated the intercom. "Flight attendants, please ensure all passengers are seated and belts fastened. We are experiencing a serious mechanical issue. Remain calm." In the cabin, murmurs spread. The flight attendants hesitated. The voice was too calm, too precise, yet it carried authority. Some glanced toward the cockpit door, eyebrows raised in confusion. One whispered to another, "Who is that? A kid?" The other shook her head. "I don't know, but follow her instructions." Maya's mind raced. The autopilot had disengaged, leaving the plane unstable. She worked quickly to engage backup systems, stabilizing altitude and reducing excessive rolling. Each adjustment required careful coordination. Her fingers danced across the yoke and throttle, balancing the failing engine against the functional one. She monitored airspeed, pitch, and altitude simultaneously. This was no simulation. Real lives hung in the balance. The captain, pale and sweating, leaned back slightly. "I've never seen anyone do this," he murmured. Maya didn't answer. There was no time for words. She communicated with air traffic control. "Mayday, Flight 482. Captain incapacitated, first officer unconscious. Request immediate guidance. We are a commercial jet, altitude 30,000 feet. Engine failure imminent. We need landing instructions." The controller's voice crackled with disbelief. "Flight 482, are you serious? A child is speaking." "Yes, sir," Maya replied, her voice calm but urgent. "Please provide heading and emergency landing instructions." The controller hesitated, then issued instructions for the nearest airport capable of handling the emergency. Maya repeated them carefully, confirming each step. She engaged the flaps partially to maintain lift, adjusted the throttle, and monitored fuel consumption. The plane stabilized slightly. Outside, turbulence continued, but she held steady. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, passengers were growing aware that something extraordinary was happening. A man whispered to his companion, "Did you hear that? She's flying the plane." Murmurs turned into shocked silence. Flight attendants exchanged incredulous glances, realizing that the teen passenger who had seemed fragile moments ago was now the only thing keeping the plane in the sky. Inside the cockpit, alarms continued to flash. The right engine was deteriorating rapidly, and the hydraulic warning indicated that control surfaces might fail at any moment. Maya calculated alternative landing strategies, weighing each option with precision. She remembered every emergency procedure her father had drilled into her. Every check, every adjustment, every decision had been ingrained over years of practice. The captain leaned over, still pale and exhausted. "I don't know if you realize the magnitude of this. You're a child, and yet you are doing everything right." Maya's focus didn't waver. "I'm trained for this. Please, sir, step back and let me guide the plane. We need to prepare for an emergency landing." The captain nodded, relinquishing minor control but staying close to provide guidance if needed. The first officer remained unconscious, completely dependent on Maya's growing command. For the first time, she felt the full weight of responsibility. Hundreds of lives, passengers, crew, children, elderly, everyone aboard, were now resting in her hands. She checked altitude, airspeed, and heading. The autopilot was partially functional but unreliable. She engaged manual control, stabilizing the plane against gusts of wind and turbulence. Her eyes flicked between instruments and the horizon. Outside, storm clouds rolled past, lightning flashing across the sky. The plane rocked, but Maya's hands remained steady. She spoke softly to herself, reciting the emergency checklist she had memorized. "Flaps at 20 degrees, throttle adjusted, landing gear sequence ready," she muttered. Her voice, though quiet, carried authority. She transmitted another update to air traffic control, describing the plane's status, engine issues, and her plan to stabilize and descend for an emergency landing. The controller, though initially incredulous, began giving step-by-step instructions. "Flight 482, descend to 10,000 feet, reduce speed to 200 knots, maintain heading 270. Maya repeated each instruction, confirming them as she adjusted the controls. The plane responded gradually, tilting smoothly as the altitude decreased. Each adjustment required split-second timing, and she executed them flawlessly. In the cabin, passengers began noticing a strange calm settling over the chaos. The voice over the intercom, clear and steady, guided them. "Remain seated. Brace for descent. Flight attendants, secure the cabin. We are managing the situation." Whispers of astonishment spread. "It's the kid. She's flying the plane." Maya's mind raced ahead. She calculated the approach, factoring in wind speed, runway length, and potential obstacles. She reviewed emergency landing procedures, mentally preparing for engine failure during descent. Her hands moved precisely over the controls, adjusting pitch and throttle to compensate for turbulence and a failing engine. Every movement was deliberate, every choice measured. As the plane descended through clouds, the first drops of rain splattered against the windshield. Thunder rumbled. Lightning illuminated the cockpit, casting fleeting shadows over the dials and gauges. Maya's pulse raced, but her movements were calm and precise. She spoke to the captain, providing updates and asking for confirmation. "Altitude stable, heading correct, flaps engaged. Are you monitoring?" The captain, awed, could only nod. I've never seen a child manage this. You're incredible," he murmured. Maya didn't respond. There was no time for praise. Her eyes remained on the instruments, scanning, adjusting, predicting. She was in full control now. Every life aboard Flight 482 depended on her. The plane, previously teetering on the edge of disaster, now had a chance. The storm, the turbulence, the failing engines, all of it was real, all of it was dangerous, and yet, under Maya's hands, the aircraft held steady. For the first time, she felt the weight of true responsibility. This was no simulation, no practice. People's lives were in her hands, and yet paradoxically, she had never felt more prepared. Years of training, years of practice with her father, and years of absorbing every detail of flight had led to this moment. She was no longer just a passenger. She was the pilot. The cockpit was tense, almost unbearably so, but Maya Collins felt a strange clarity. She had stepped fully into the co-pilot's seat and now held the plane's fate in her hands. The first officer remained unconscious, slumped against the console, and the captain, pale and exhausted, leaned back slightly, trusting her judgment. She adjusted her seat, checked the instruments, and took a deep breath. Every gauge, dial, and alarm was now her responsibility. Flight 482, you're clear to begin emergency procedures, Air Traffic Control said over the radio. The controller's voice carried disbelief and urgency. Confirm your status and intentions. Maya gripped the microphone and spoke calmly, her voice steady. Flight 482, Captain incapacitated, First Officer unconscious, Engine 2 failing, requesting immediate guidance for emergency descent and landing. We are prepared to follow all instructions. The controller paused, then issued step-by-step instructions for descent, specifying heading, speed, and altitude. Maya repeated each instruction meticulously, ensuring she understood every detail. Then she turned back to the cockpit controls. The plane was still turbulent, the right engine sputtering intermittently, but under her guidance it was holding. She adjusted the throttle, carefully compensating for the failing engine while maintaining altitude and heading. The captain leaned over slightly. You're actually doing this," he murmured, awe in his voice. Maya didn't respond. She had no time for words. Every second counted. She adjusted the flaps, then calculated the optimal speed for a controlled descent. Her hands moved instinctively, guided by training, intuition, and a deep sense of responsibility. In the cabin, passengers remained unaware of the full extent of the crisis. Drinks spilled, and whispers of fear passed through the rows, but most passengers simply clutched their seats, trusting that the flight crew was managing the situation. Flight attendants, however, had begun to notice the unusual calm in the intercom. "Remain seated. Brace for landing," the voice instructed, precise and confident. One whispered to another, "It's the kid, she's flying the plane." Maya ignored the murmurs. Her focus was entirely on the instruments. She monitored airspeed, altitude, engine RPMs, and fuel levels simultaneously. One mistake could cost lives. Her hands moved over the controls with the precision of a seasoned pilot, adjusting throttle, rudder, and yoke in a carefully choreographed sequence. The metallic vibration from the failing engine persisted, but she compensated expertly. She engaged the backup systems for hydraulics, knowing that full control of the flaps and landing gear might be compromised. The plane responded to her adjustments, slowly stabilizing. Each movement required careful calculation. Too much throttle and the plane could veer dangerously, too little and it could lose altitude. Her training had prepared her for this. Her father's words echoed in her memory: focus, observe, react. Panic is for those unprepared. Minutes felt like hours as Maya maintained control. Outside, the storm raged. Rain lashed against the windows and lightning illuminated the clouds in jagged flashes. Thunder rolled through the sky, shaking the fuselage. Yet inside the cockpit, Maya remained steady. She kept constant communication with air traffic control, providing updates on altitude, engine status, and stability. Controllers began to trust her instructions, amazed at the accuracy and composure of a young girl barely able to drive legally on the ground. She calculated the descent trajectory carefully. The nearest airport was 20 minutes away, but with one engine failing and hydraulics partially compromised, she knew that landing would be delicate. She monitored approach angles, wind speeds, and runway alignment. Every adjustment was precise. She spoke aloud as if guiding herself. flaps at 15 degrees, landing gear check, altitude descending at 500 feet per minute, speed 200 knots. The captain watched, silently marveling. "I've never seen anyone do this," he said, voice barely audible over the alarms and engine hum. Maya responded without taking her eyes off the instruments. "We don't have a choice. Focus, sir. We'll get through this." The plane began its descent. Passengers, still mostly unaware of the magnitude of the emergency, tightened seat belts as turbulence intensified. The flight attendants whispered to each other, fear and admiration mixing. Outside, storm clouds swirled, lightning illuminating the horizon. The plane's metal groaned with every movement, and a low, warning alarm from the failing engine added tension to the scene. Maya adjusted throttle and rudder with careful precision, compensating for the weakening right engine. The aircraft responded, tilting slightly to counterbalance, maintaining a stable approach. She kept constant communication with air traffic control, confirming headings, speeds, and altitudes. Flight 482 reduced speed to 180 knots. "Prepare for visual approach," the controller instructed. "Yes, sir," Maya replied. Speed reducing to 180 knots, stabilizing descent. Her hands moved deftly, throttle responding smoothly, yoke steady. The plane, though battered by turbulence and mechanical failure, remained on course. She glanced briefly at the captain, who nodded subtly, reassurance and disbelief etched across his face. Maya's mind raced ahead, anticipating the landing procedure. She knew that with the right engine faltering and hydraulics unreliable, even the simplest adjustment could mean the difference between disaster and survival. She calculated touchdown speed, flap positions, and glide path angles, keeping every detail in mind. The plane passed 10,000 feet, approaching the airport's airspace. Maya prepared for the final approach. She extended the flaps slightly, stabilizing the descent. The failing engine sputtered, sending a jolt through the fuselage, but her adjustments countered the instability. She spoke through the intercom. "Passengers, remain seated. Brace for potential turbulence during landing. Flight attendants, secure all cabin items." Whispers of astonishment spread through the cabin. "Is that a kid?" one passenger muttered. She's flying the plane," another said, wide-eyed. Flight attendants glanced at each other, incredulous, then continued securing passengers. Maya's concentration was absolute. She maintained heading, controlled speed, monitored flaps, and prepared the landing gear sequence. Every move was deliberate, precise. Outside, the storm clouds began to thin slightly, revealing glimpses of the runway ahead. She calculated distance, wind adjustments, and speed, preparing for the most critical maneuver of her young life. Minutes felt like lifetimes as she guided the plane through the storm, engines whining, fuselage groaning. The first officer remained unconscious, the captain barely capable of supporting minor adjustments, and yet Maya remained calm, precise, unshaken. Every passenger aboard Flight 482, though unaware, owed their safety to the knowledge, skill, and courage of a 14-year-old girl. Maya's voice was firm and commanding, yet calm. Flight 482, final approach initiated. Runway in sight, all systems checked, brace for landing sequence. The words echoed in the cockpit, a mixture of authority, focus, and reassurance. The plane responded smoothly, descent rate steady, heading aligned perfectly. She had taken control. For the first time, Maya felt the full gravity of the situation, yet she also felt a quiet confidence. This was the moment she had been unknowingly preparing for her entire life. The plane was under control, the storm partially behind them, and the runway ahead. Survival depended not on luck, but on skill, precision, and the courage to act when everyone else faltered. Maya Collins, dismissed by many as just a kid, was now the pilot in command, the guardian of hundreds of lives, and the only hope for Flight 482. Every movement, every adjustment, every decision was hers. She would not fail. The runway was still miles away, a distant strip of light at the edge of storm clouds, yet it represented everything Maya Collins had been striving for. She gripped the yoke tightly, eyes darting between the instruments and the faint glow of the airport's approach lights through the rain-smeared windshield. The failing right engine groaned, vibrating violently with each adjustment she made. The plane tilted slightly to the right, and she immediately compensated with subtle rudder input, steadying the aircraft. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained razor-sharp. This was the culmination of years of practice, the moment she had been trained for, but never truly hoped would arrive. Air traffic control crackled over the radio. Flight 482, winds are gusting at 25 knots, runway wet, confirm landing readiness. Maya's voice was calm and precise, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through her veins. Confirmed, Flight 482, runway in sight, systems checked, preparing for final approach. Outside, the storm raged with relentless intensity. Rain hammered the windshield, lightning streaked across the dark clouds, and the plane pitched and yawed slightly with every gust of wind. Maya adjusted the flaps to 20 degrees, monitored airspeed meticulously, and corrected minor deviations in heading. Her hands moved with a fluidity born of countless simulations, each movement deliberate, each decision weighted by the lives aboard the aircraft. The captain leaned back in awe, still recovering from the physical strain but slowly regaining composure. I can't believe this," he muttered. "You're controlling everything and it's working." Maya didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. Her focus was absolute. She engaged the autopilot partially to stabilize minor deviations but kept her hands on the controls, ready to override instantly. The right engine sputtered again, sending a sharp vibration through the fuselage. She compensated with increased thrust on the left engine, careful not to exceed safe limits. Every adjustment was critical. Any miscalculation could send the plane into an uncontrollable spin. The passengers were still largely unaware of the crisis, though tension ran thick in the cabin. Flight attendants whispered anxiously, following her instructions. "Remain seated, brace for turbulence, fasten your seat belts." Murmurs passed among passengers, curiosity and fear mingling. "Did you hear that? She's controlling the plane," one whispered to another. "She's a kid," another gasped. Maya's mind ran through the emergency landing checklist. Landing gear, flaps, approach angle, wind speed, runway length, braking distance. All calculations had to be precise. She adjusted the yoke slightly, compensating for a sudden gust of wind. The plane tilted dangerously, then stabilized as she applied subtle corrections. She could feel the weight of hundreds of lives pressing down on her shoulders, yet she refused to falter. "Flight 482, you are cleared for final approach," air traffic control instructed. "Runway 34 left, wet conditions. Confirm gear and flaps." "Confirmed, Flight 482, Maya responded. She carefully lowered the landing gear, monitoring each gauge to ensure proper engagement. The hydraulic warnings were still active, but she had accounted for partial failure. The plane's wheels extended with a reassuring mechanical click, and she breathed a fraction easier. Flaps fully deployed, descent rate controlled. The runway lights grew brighter, a beacon of hope in the storm's chaos. The captain, now fully recovering, leaned over to Maya. "I've flown in hurricanes, ice storms, mechanical failures. Never have I seen someone so young handle this with such composure. You're extraordinary." Maya didn't respond. She had no time for praise. The plane was shaking violently now as turbulence intensified. Gusts threatened to push the aircraft off course. Her hands moved with precise coordination, adjusting throttle, rudder, and yoke in perfect harmony. She maintained speed at 180 knots, carefully monitoring descent rate, approach angle, and runway alignment. Outside, rain lashed the windows, the storm refusing to relent. Lightning illuminated the clouds in stark, jagged bursts, momentarily blinding Maya. Her hands instinctively corrected the plane's pitch and roll. Passengers gripped their seats, unaware that a child was performing the only thing keeping them alive. Flight attendants whispered in astonishment, their fear mixed with admiration. "She's doing it. She's actually flying this plane. Maya's mind raced ahead, calculating braking distance for a wet runway, anticipating wind gusts, and preparing for the moment of touchdown. She engaged the autopilot minimally, allowing her precise adjustments to guide the plane in a controlled descent. The right engine sputtered violently again, sending vibrations through the fuselage. She compensated instantly, adjusting the left engine and subtly tilting the aircraft to counteract imbalance. Her focus was absolute. Every muscle, every thought, every instinct was dedicated to the survival of Flight 482. She spoke softly to herself, reciting mental checklists and confirming each calculation. Flaps at 20 degrees, landing gear down, speed 180 knots, glide path stable, runway aligned, prepared for touchdown. The plane descended steadily. The airport's approach lights grew brighter, the runway now visible through the storm. Maya adjusted for crosswinds, subtle tilts, and the weakening right engine. The aircraft wobbled slightly, but she maintained control. She had learned long ago that confidence and calm precision could overcome fear and chaos. Her training, her father's lessons, every simulation, it all culminated in this moment. The captain watched in awe. "I have never seen anyone perform like this. You're amazing," he whispered. Maya didn't respond. There was no time. The runway was just minutes away and she had to ensure a safe landing. Every adjustment mattered. One miscalculation could endanger hundreds of lives. The plane continued to descend, and Maya carefully managed throttle, flaps, and angle of approach. The storm still raged around them, but inside the cockpit there was clarity, focus, and resolve. She spoke through the intercom, addressing the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for a landing. Please remain seated, fasten your seat belts, and brace for turbulence. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." Her voice, calm and commanding, reassured those in the cabin, even though none fully understood the peril they were facing. The runway drew closer. Maya calculated the final approach, ensuring descent rate, speed, and alignment were perfect. The plane trembled as gusts buffeted the fuselage, but she maintained precise control. She repeated mental checklists: flaps, gear, glide path, crosswind adjustment, final throttle balance. Her hands moved like a conductor leading an orchestra, each motion deliberate, each adjustment critical. The storm was relentless, but Maya's focus never wavered. She visualized the runway in her mind, planning every correction. The first officer remained unconscious, the captain exhausted but supportive, and yet she controlled every aspect of the aircraft's flight. She was no longer just a kid. She was the pilot, the guardian, the only hope for Flight 482. As the runway lights grew nearer, Maya prepared for the final descent. Every calculation, every instinct, every decision led to this moment. The plane, trembling and battered, was under her precise control. The storm, the turbulence, the failing engine, all of it would be conquered by her skill and determination. Maya Collins was ready. The runway loomed closer through the rain-smeared cockpit windows, a beacon of hope piercing the stormy darkness. Maya Collins gripped the yoke with steady hands, her eyes flicking between instruments and the faint strip of lights on the horizon. The plane trembled violently under the persistent gusts, the failing right engine groaning intermittently with every adjustment. Hundreds of lives rested on her shoulders, and the weight of responsibility was almost suffocating, but she remained unwavering. Flight 482, winds are shifting, air traffic control crackled through the radio. Crosswind 28 knots, confirm approach. Maya's voice was calm, precise, and commanding. Confirmed, Flight 482, adjusting for crosswind, stabilizing approach, all systems monitored. She adjusted the rudder slightly, countering the gusts, and applied minimal throttle to maintain glide path. The aircraft tilted gently to the left as she compensated for the failing engine, and it responded almost imperceptibly, but enough to keep the descent controlled. Inside the cockpit, the captain leaned back, pale and exhausted. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured. A 14-year-old controlling a commercial jet in a storm unbelievable. Maya didn't respond. Her focus was absolute. She monitored altitude, speed, heading, and flap positions simultaneously, calculating every minute variable in real time. The plane shuddered violently as another gust hit, and she adjusted pitch and throttle in perfect harmony. One miscalculation could send the aircraft veering off course or cause it to stall. Every passenger's life depended on her precision. The first officer remained unconscious, completely dependent on Maya's skill. The cockpit was tense, alarms blaring softly, the storm outside relentless. Yet Maya's calmness contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. Every movement was deliberate, precise, and calculated. Years of simulation training and her father's teachings had prepared her for this, though nothing could have replicated the reality of guiding hundreds of lives through a storm. In the cabin, passengers were beginning to notice the severity of the situation. Flight attendants moved swiftly, helping people brace for landing. Whispered words spread. "Did you hear that? The co-pilot's a kid. She's controlling the plane." Murmurs of fear mixed with awe filled the cabin. Children clutched their parents, wide-eyed. Adults gripped armrests, trusting in the calm, commanding voice that had instructed them to remain seated. Maya adjusted the flaps to 30 degrees, slowing the plane to the ideal landing speed. The landing gear, already deployed, was monitored closely. Hydraulic warnings persisted, but she had compensated for partial failure. The plane responded to every subtle adjustment. She monitored airspeed, altitude, and glide path, recalculating every few seconds. The runway approached steadily, the lights shimmering like a lifeline in the storm. The crosswinds grew stronger as the aircraft neared the threshold. Maya corrected with gentle rudder and slight aileron input, keeping the plane perfectly aligned. Thunder rumbled above, and rain lashed the cockpit windows in heavy sheets. The fuselage shuddered, sending vibrations up her arms, but her movements were precise, almost instinctual. She could feel the aircraft responding beneath her fingertips, each adjustment a conversation with the metal and machinery of the plane. "Adjusting throttle for flare," she whispered to herself. She slightly reduced engine power, preparing for the final moment of touchdown. The right engine groaned and sputtered violently, but the aircraft remained stable. Maya's heart raced, but her mind was crystal clear. Years of memorized procedures, countless simulations, and her father's guidance were now being executed perfectly under pressure. "Brace positions," she instructed calmly over the intercom. "Everyone prepare for landing. Flight attendants secure the cabin completely." The plane descended lower, runway lights growing larger with each passing second. Maya kept her hands firm on the controls, subtly adjusting for wind, speed, and glide angle. The storm howled around them, but inside, control and precision reigned. She focused entirely on the instruments and the horizon, visualizing the landing in her mind's eye, anticipating every movement, every adjustment necessary for a safe touchdown. The captain leaned forward slightly. You really can do this," he muttered. Maya didn't answer, her voice reserved for the intercom and herself. One false move now could spell disaster. Every passenger's life, every crew member's safety depended on her flawless execution. The plane touched down gently on the runway, the wheels hitting wet asphalt with a satisfying thud. Maya immediately engaged the brakes cautiously, applying reverse thrust from the left engine to slow the descent without causing instability. The right engine's sputtering became more pronounced, but the aircraft held steady. Rain sprayed in sheets, lightning illuminating the cockpit intermittently, but Maya's hands moved with calm precision. The plane began to decelerate, veering slightly with the crosswinds. Maya corrected carefully with rudder adjustments, keeping the fuselage aligned with the centerline. The captain breathed a long, shaky sigh of relief. You've done it. You've got it under control." Passengers, still largely unaware of the full danger, felt the subtle change in motion. The turbulence eased slightly as the plane slowed. Some whispered anxiously, others still gripped their seats. Flight attendants, still in disbelief, moved to reassure the passengers. The voice over the intercom remained calm, guiding everyone smoothly. Remain seated. We are safely landing. Brace for final deceleration. The plane rolled down the runway, reverse thrust applied, brakes engaged, and tires spraying water. Maya carefully monitored every gauge, speed decreasing steadily, alignment perfect, engines responding to subtle throttle adjustments. The storm had not relented entirely, but the worst was over. Finally, the plane came to a near-complete stop. Maya maintained control until she could safely release reverse thrust and allow the plane to taxi to the terminal. The runway lights reflected on the wet tarmac, casting a faint glow across the still rumbling fuselage. Passengers looked around, sensing something extraordinary had happened, but many had yet to realize the full scale of the emergency. Maya exhaled quietly, her hands finally releasing the yoke. The cockpit was silent, save for the low hum of engines at idle. The captain turned to her, eyes wide with admiration and disbelief. I've never, you saved us all, he said, his voice trembling. Maya only nodded, exhausted but focused. She had guided the plane through storm, turbulence, engine failure, and crosswinds, performing every maneuver flawlessly. The first officer remained unconscious, but the immediate danger had passed. She had executed an emergency landing that would be remembered by all aboard. Outside, passengers began to stir, sensing the plane had stopped. A collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the cabin, though many still remained unaware of the true hero behind their survival. Flight attendants exchanged looks of astonishment. "She did it. She really did it," one whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Maya Collins, once dismissed as just a kid, had assumed full control, guided Flight 482 safely through near disaster, and proved that courage, knowledge, and determination could defy expectations. She sat back slightly, hands still shaking with residual adrenaline, but her mind clear. Hundreds of lives had been preserved under her careful, precise guidance. As the plane taxied to the gate, the captain finally spoke again, voice steady now with relief. You are incredible, Maya. Today, you proved that age means nothing when skill, preparation, and courage take control." Maya smiled faintly, exhausted but composed. The storm outside continued, but inside the cockpit, calm and relief reigned. Flight 482 had survived, and Maya Collins had become more than a passenger. She had become a hero. The engines hummed quietly as Flight 482 taxied toward the gate. The storm outside had begun to abate, though the clouds still loomed dark and heavy above. Inside the cabin, passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring in disbelief and relief. Some clutched one another, others simply sat frozen, processing the incredible events they had survived. Relief mingled with awe, but few had fully grasped the truth. The teenager who had been dismissed, underestimated, and overlooked had flown their plane through one of the most harrowing experiences of their lives. Maya Collins slowly rose from the cockpit seat, her legs trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. She had maintained control of the plane, managed a failing engine, navigated turbulence, and executed a textbook emergency landing, all while keeping hundreds of lives safe. She adjusted her hair, wiped the sweat from her brow, and carefully stood, aware of the intense stares she was about to encounter. The captain, pale but smiling, rose to his feet as well. He looked at Maya with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Everyone needs to know," he said, his voice carrying through the intercom. "The co-pilot today was 14 years old, Maya Collins. She flew this plane and landed it safely when I could barely keep control. Everyone aboard owes their lives to her skill, her courage, and her calm under pressure." A stunned silence spread through the cabin. Then whispers erupted into astonished gasps. Passengers turned to each other, incredulous. Did he just say a kid? 14 years old. She flew the plane. Flight attendants, eyes wide with shock, quickly moved to reassure passengers while also expressing their own admiration. Tears glistened in the eyes of some passengers, who were finally beginning to comprehend what had just occurred. Maya remained seated for a moment, overwhelmed by the enormity of the praise but quietly proud. She had never sought recognition. She had only focused on keeping the plane steady, on protecting everyone aboard. Yet, in that moment, the acknowledgement of her extraordinary actions sank in. She could see the faces of passengers lighting up with gratitude, the flight attendants nodding in respect, and the captain giving her a look of utter admiration. The first officer, now conscious thanks to medical attention from the flight attendants and paramedics waiting on the tarmac, looked over and blinked in disbelief. "Wait, you were flying?" he asked, his voice shaking. Maya nodded humbly, managing a small, tired smile. "Yes, I could see the instruments and I knew what to do." As the plane finally reached the gate and the engines powered down, emergency crews and airport personnel moved toward the aircraft, some clapping, others murmuring words of praise. Maya stepped down from the cockpit, her small frame almost lost in the crowd of adults, but her presence radiated confidence and quiet authority. Cameras flashed, phones captured the moment, and reporters began to line the tarmac. News of a 14-year-old successfully landing a commercial airliner in a storm spread quickly, creating a wave of awe and admiration worldwide. Passengers filed off the plane, some approaching Maya to thank her personally. "I can't believe it," said an older man, shaking her hand with tears in his eyes. "You saved our lives. I don't even know what to say." Maya smiled softly. "You don't need to say anything. I'm just glad everyone is safe." A mother with her child hugged her tightly. "You're our hero," she whispered. Children looked up at her with wide, awestruck eyes, seeing courage and skill embodied in someone their own age. The captain stood nearby, holding a microphone as airport authorities, reporters, and onlookers gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and steady, "today we witnessed something extraordinary. Flight 482 faced mechanical failure, severe turbulence, and the incapacitation of our flight crew. But thanks to one person, one incredibly brave and skilled young person, every life aboard was saved." Maya Collins, 14 years old, took control of this aircraft, stabilized it, and landed it safely. She is the true hero of Flight 482. Applause erupted spontaneously, some passengers standing, others clapping with tears in their eyes. Maya felt her face flush with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. She had never imagined herself in this position. The attention, the accolades, the gratitude, they were overwhelming, but beneath it all, she felt something deeper, a profound sense of accomplishment and responsibility fulfilled. Reporters rushed forward, microphones extended. "Maya, how did you stay so calm?" one asked. "Weren't you scared?" another asked. "Did you ever think you could actually land the plane?" Maya's voice remained calm, thoughtful. "I focused on what I could control," she said softly. "I relied on training, on the procedures I've memorized, and on staying calm. Fear is natural, but panic doesn't help anyone. I just did what I had to do to keep everyone safe." Her words were simple, yet carried the wisdom of someone much older than her years. Air traffic control personnel who had guided her through the descent nodded in approval as she spoke. "Maya Collins, your composure, knowledge, and skill under pressure are nothing short of extraordinary. You set an example for pilots of all ages." Even seasoned pilots in the crowd were visibly moved. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled broadly. "I've trained for decades," one said quietly, "but I've never seen someone this young handle an emergency with such precision. Truly remarkable." Maya's father, who had followed the flight's updates closely, stepped onto the tarmac as the crowd slowly dispersed. His eyes filled with tears as he embraced his daughter. "I always knew you had talent, Maya, but today you saved lives. I'm so proud of you." Maya hugged him tightly, exhausted yet relieved. "I just did what I had to do, Dad," she whispered. "I didn't think about being a hero. I just wanted everyone to be safe." Paramedics checked the crew and passengers for injuries. Fortunately, aside from minor bruises and shaken nerves, everyone was physically unharmed. The storm had subsided, leaving a calm, clear night sky above the airport. Maya looked up, feeling the weight of everything she had accomplished, the storm behind her and the path forward filled with endless possibilities. News of her heroism spread quickly. Social media buzzed with stories of the young pilot who had landed a commercial airliner during a storm. Headlines appeared worldwide. Teen saves Flight 482, heroic pilot at 14. Girl lands jet in storm, passengers safe. Maya Collins, the young hero who defied expectations. She became an inspiration, a symbol of courage, skill, and calm in the face of overwhelming adversity. As the crowd dispersed and the passengers reunited with loved ones, Maya quietly walked away from the spotlight. Her hands still shook slightly, her legs tired, but her mind was clear. She had faced one of the most extraordinary challenges imaginable and succeeded. She had proven that age was no barrier to courage, skill, and responsibility. In the quiet aftermath, the captain approached her once more. "Maya, you've changed how we see pilots and perhaps even the world," he said softly. "Your bravery, focus, and skill saved lives today. You're not just a hero, you're a reminder that greatness can come from anyone, anywhere." Maya smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting exhaustion, pride, and humility. "Thank you, sir. I just did what I had to do. Everyone's safety was the most important thing." As she walked away from the plane, the night sky stretched above her, calm and endless. The storm had passed, and Flight 482 had landed safely. Maya Collins had not only survived the challenge but had risen to meet it with courage, intelligence, and poise far beyond her years. She had taken control when no one else could, navigated chaos with clarity, and emerged as a hero. Flight 482 would never be the same again. Neither would the passengers, the crew, or the world watching this incredible story unfold. And Maya Collins, once underestimated, once dismissed as just a kid, had become an enduring symbol of bravery, skill, and the extraordinary potential that can rise in moments of crisis. The world had witnessed a hero, and she had been a child.